There's certain cases where I don't think that there's negotiation to be had about an implementation plan. I remember a case where one of my teams was asked to build a feature, to build a new API. And here are the performance requirements that we're being asked to commit to. Product owner caught wind of what we're looking to put in, and it's going to take some extra work to put in the additional caching layer as a Dynamo database to cache it. And the product owner put it all into a deck and said, okay, well, here's the tech team's implementation plan. If you do it this way, you do it that way. My manager at the time kind of said, halt, stop. This is not a negotiation. If you want this feature, this is this technology standards to implement that feature with these performance standards.
Welcome to Tech Council, your go-to podcast for mastering the art of building in the enterprise world. Join hosts Duncan and Jason Ehmke as they unpack the strategies, tools, and insights you need to drive innovation at scale. Brought to you by DevGrid, we're here to empower developers, tech leaders, and enterprise builders. Hit subscribe, and let's dive into today's episode.
Episode 4. It's crazy. I've actually kind of starting to enjoy this.
Yeah, they're good discussions so far. Yeah, I think today will be a little bit of a test of that with the topic that we're going to go through.
Yeah. So I'll introduce and then let's kick it over to you. But I think with the topic we want to try to tackle today is this concept of, to put it in summary, like wartime, peacetime. Right. And what we mean by that is understanding the cycle that your organization is in, like where in the business cycle or the financial cycle that the organization's in, and how that impacts your ability to operate and how you're going to operate and everything in terms of your funding, in terms of, what's important changes dramatically with your, kind of wartime versus peacetime approach. And so we'll go through a bunch of different ways of thinking about that. We'll try to keep the Godfather references to a minimum, but I'm not going to promise anything. That's actually a great example, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I don't know. What are you excited to talk about with this?
Well, it's a tough balance, and I've seen this at a lot of places. Most recently with some of the things that we were working on, but in all the big enterprises that I've been a part of, it's easy to get stuck in one rut or the other and not recognize that you are at war or are at a peacetime where you have to make some intentional decisions on what am I going to do right now? What am I not going to do right now? And how to balance your initiatives as a whole technology organization. It's tough. It takes intentional work to really evaluate where you are, where your teams are, and what your teams are capable of. Yeah,
I mean, totally. And I think, using the Godfather reference a little bit further, for those of you that don't know this, you really should go watch 1 and 2. They're fantastic movies. They hold up over time. And, the point was there was this guy that had been the consigliere of the Don forever, right? Like he was very trusted. He had been extremely competent. He was great. And yet the situation was changing, and he was a lawyer, and he was great to have when things were good, but they were literally entering this situation where they're going to have like a mob war. Right. And he was too clean of a guy. Like he needed somebody that could get their hands dirty a little bit more. That's why it's always kind of the metaphor everybody refers to. And you and I have been through this a couple of different times at different places, not to mention our own company. But, we, like when we joined Passport back in 2018, that was, I wouldn't call it peacetime exactly, because it was a little different, and this is why there's nuance and there's a lot of things there. But it was the good times.
You're always at war in a startup.
Well, yeah, that is a good point. But like in a startup, it looks differently, right? Because everything, it looks different. Everything is kind of, you're scrambling for survival, but also, you have to also understand, like, where are you in the funding cycle of a startup, right? So if we joined shortly after they just raised the Series C. Right. And so that there was a lot of excitement, a lot of momentum, a lot of funding to do things. And there was so much we wanted to do. And so, that was the push to go and do all these different things. And you have so much opportunity you want to capture and so much value you want to capture that you maybe aren't applying the right level, that much scrutiny to it. Right. Like, it's like, hey, we want to go capture as much as we can. We want to build as fast as we can versus, fast forward 2 years into that journey, okay, the financial situation, now we're coming up on our funding round. The markets aren't quite as frothy, all those different things. It's like, okay, now we have to think of the calculus for our financial decisions is totally different. And, whereas before you might spend $50,000 to $100,000 on this new tool because it makes you marginally better. It's like, no, cut all those tools. Right. And so it's, you get into those types of things. And then we're seeing it at some of our, places we've worked in the big banks that are going, right now there's a lot of uncertainty on the macro level. Right. And when you have financial uncertainty at the macro level, then, the accountants and the bean counters and stuff take over, right? Like they really start driving decisions, and, rightly so. There's a good reason for that becomes a pattern. But you have to understand that dynamic and that reality so you can then respond to it appropriately, right? Like don't get discouraged, understand the situation you're in as a leader, understand that the expectations have changed, right? Like it's gone from growth at all costs, or, we want this, it's more important to get these capabilities. So it's like, no, protect the house, protect the castle. And so, we're seeing some of our friends and customers go through this right now. And it's, and even ourselves, right, to some degree, right? Like, it's like, how should we be properly calibrating our orientation around like the work we're going to do? How should we calibrate, how do we prioritize? Because it changes the priorities. So
and that can change sometimes. It can change weekly, where you might be war for a week and then peace for a couple of days to clean some things up, and then you're right back at it. So I think depending on the size of the organization, that that time period could be different. You might spend 6 months at war, so to speak, with in a large enterprise, and then you've got 3 months of a lull or peacetime that you're, well, what are we doing? Well, what did you prepare for is the question. But I think I like the analogy that they used at Passport, and they put a picture to it, and they said Pirates to Navy. And I like that because it gives you a good visual of, if you're pirates, well, you're fighting, you're getting things done. What are you doing? I don't know sometimes, but you're going, and you're building up this war chest. And then, you go to Navy, that's clean cut, that's trimming the fat, that's, doing your, I guess, your exercises to prepare for that next time where you might have to get scrappy and push. But it's an ebb and a flow of being really scrappy, making a mess, and then spending some time to clean it up and prepare for the next time. But it's a balance. And I say that balance intentionally here because if you spend too long in one or the other, you spend too much time at war and you don't let yourself pull out of that, you're going to build up all sorts of technical debt. You're going to build up, and you're eventually going to be slow moving. You're going to be this big overweight behemoth of an application, not as an organization, but you've built up all this cruft that now taking you longer to get through. But on the other side, if you spend too much time at peace, well, there's no point in having a Ferrari in your garage if you never get to drive it. And so, you've got to balance it out. And I've seen it where you're at war, and then, well, what do we do now? Well, that's the right question, but the problem is that you're asking that in the first place.
Yeah. So you said a bunch of things there. I want to frame it back to you, right? So the one, you made a few different points. One is that these things change, and I think there's different time horizons based on the organization. So we should talk about that. Two, the Pirates to Navy metaphor. I'm sitting here trying to remember what book that's from. Somebody talked about that. Maybe it was in Turn the Ship Around, or maybe it was in something else. I don't remember. I'll have to look that up. But and then kind of the third thing, it's interesting. In some ways, you're equating war and peace to war is shipping, peace is maintenance. And I think, I want to kind of turn that back to you. Is that what you mean to say? Is kind of like heads down, just ship new stuff versus, make sure everything doesn't fall apart? Are you equating those things, or are you thinking about it differently?
That's how I've seen it. That's how I've observed it in my past positions of, you're at war, you're just getting things done, not at all costs, but you're getting things done, and you're making trade-offs that you wouldn't normally make. You're leaving some dirty code in there. Maybe you're shipping something that is not quite tuned performance wise, and but it works, right? It's good It's good enough for what you're trying to do. It's good enough for your security. You're not leaving any glaring security holes, but it's good enough to meet the deliverable that you committed to without going over, way overboard with optimizations.
So that's good. So let's pull at that for a second, right? Like, so if that's the case, if it's like, and you even talked about like in a small organization like ours, right? Like if we're saying, every 2 weeks or something like that, or whatever, some period of time, you said it might change on a week to week basis. Should you be switching back and forth, or is that a discipline issue, right? Like, should we be more, not us explicitly, but use us as an example, like as a case study, like, should we be more steady where it's like, we've seen places where you might say, hey, somewhere between 15 and 20% of your capacity should be done on the steady state maintenance to make sure you don't have problems creep up. Is that more the solution, or like, do you think kind of flipping back and forth between those quote unquote states is actually the right way to do it?
I don't think there's a one size fits all there. It could be on a regular basis. If you're going to sit in the middle of the spectrum, you would see a percentage of your capacity devoted to your maintenance, your tech debt, so it doesn't creep up on you. But I've also seen where there's no room for maintenance besides the keep the lights on type thing, but you're spending 100% of capacity roundabout on shipping new features. Then on the other side, I've seen it where there's not a whole lot of new features to build, and so what are you doing except for spending maybe 60-70% of your time on your tech debt, on your maintenance, on your things that maybe you've let slide for a while. So there's no one size there. Of course, it's easy to say it's a very binary wartime, peacetime, but really at the end of the day, it's not that clear. It's not that you're never really going to know. Nobody's really going to tell you what that is. But there's also, there's some nuances there as well that we can get into of holding that line, because you can let yourself slip into that war mode and ship at all costs mode if you let it happen.
Cool. So yeah, it's interesting. I think we're talking about two different things that are very complementary. I want to tease out the separation of the two, right? So you're talking about balancing feature delivery with maintenance, for lack of a better word, tech debt, whatever you want to use. So the non-explicitly new features clean up and making things better, run better, more efficient, etc. And kind of viewing those as the flip over. When I think about wartime, peacetime, it obviously that's a factor, right? Like the wartime, peacetime could be a lever on that spectrum. I thinking like, again, big company, it's financial related, usually financial or competitive situation related, right? Like, it's like, why is the situation happening, right? Like maybe there's layoffs going on. Maybe there's like, why is all that happening, and understanding, because what I've seen, and I won't name any names, but like I've seen situations where, people come to leaders with these proposals like, hey, we could do all this cool stuff. And it's like, do you not realize, like, I'm trying to keep you in a job right now? Like, what are you talking about? Right. Like, and so that kind of, want to give people the tools to have situational awareness. And then also, okay, what do you do in that situation? Right. Like, and like, again, we have friends that are going through this right now where their companies, like, you might have been running a 200-person organization. It might be down to 80 people right now. And like, how are they, how do you not get discouraged? How do you not get down? How do you think about prioritizing and casting a vision for your team in that context?
Yeah, that's tough. I think there's definitely flavors of this. I don't. That's tough. I'm not really. I don't know. I'm struggling with that. I think you kind of left field me there on that one a little bit. And
well, okay, so let me see if I can help, since I threw you the wolves there. Yeah, I mean, I think my impression is first and foremost, it's kind of some stuff we talked about before, but you got to understand, as a leader in technology, right? Like, too often leaders in the technology organization get super, what's the right, isolated or insulated or self-referential, right? Like, and they're not connected enough to business outcomes. They're not connected enough to what goes on. It was actually one of the things I was super, super grateful for my time at Passport, because after spending, more than half a decade at a place like Bank of America, buried in a technology organization, I've never come close to a business outcome, like being accountable for a business outcome in a place like B of A. That's so abstracted away from a technology leader. At least it was back then. And then being VP of engineering at a Series C startup, it's like, no, business outcomes are going to fall right on your head. Right. And that was great to change the perspective and to get a more external orientation on the team and on the work. And it's not just about, shipping your stuff. It's about driving a business outcome. And then and also understanding, where are we, like I said, in the life cycle of the business? Is this a situation where like one of our customers, for example, we know is dealing with, they have a huge install base. They're, almost monopolistic in some ways. And yet their biggest risk is their customers getting frustrated with their stability issues, right? Like that's literally the biggest existential risk to their business, is that they can't keep their stuff online. Right. And so that's a very different problem than, maybe some other bank who's under, interest rate risk or credit risk problems, where their balance sheet, which is what we've seen at other places, where the balance sheet just gets super tight. And because, they basically can't spend any money because they have to put additional cash on the balance sheet to stay solvent. And so just all the business priorities that tech would have just go out the window, because the company has to stay solvent, or else the feds will get involved, right? Because it's a bank or a financial institution. And so
I was saying before, though, with balancing your tech work with your business outcomes or your feature delivery, because you let yourself get so, I guess, painted into a corner where you're letting those go for so long, and so now you're to your point, you've let your stability struggle, and now it takes some intentional, I guess, prioritization or intentional focus, because it's built up so much. And so now, it's a significant burden now to do that, versus, partitioning that capacity out to always be focusing on those things in your strategy.
Yeah. Oh man, you just hit a total hot button for me. Like one thing, and I remember I've counseled a bunch of app managers on this, and I remember one guy in particular, always used to say things to me like, well, the business won't let me do this. And I hate that. That's the number one hot button for me, is I don't have time for it. So bad. I may have lost my shit on him a little bit. I might have yelled him in a bit. It was ridiculous. Like I think as an app manager, and that takes different forms at different levels at different companies and things like that. But that kind of abstract role of app manager, the person who's the most senior technical person involved in an application, is responsible for the accountability of that application. Usually in a catalog like DevGrids or whatever, it's the person whose name's on it and who's accountable for those things. That you are responsible for the outcomes in your application. So if your application's breaking all the time, or you get behind on keeping your tech up to date, and you're hitting end of life issues, or you're hitting this and that and the other, your thing's unstable, don't ever come to me with, or anybody really with, well, the business wouldn't let us. Like that just doesn't fly, right? Like it's your job to make them, right? Like you serve them, sure, you serve the business. And the work that you do has to serve the business, but it's not their job to maintain your application. It's not their job to make sure your application is compliant with whatever regulatory or other compliance frameworks, or that you're not getting hacked, or, you're not running on Java 4 or whatever it is, right? Like,
where do you think that breaks down? Because the way I see it is, when I've just watched some teams break down work and organize their work, they almost let themselves get, I don't want to say bullied, but pressured into just keeping your user stories focused to the business outcomes. And I'll start pressing them on this and say, well, what about this and this and this? Oh, well, that needs to go into a separate epic. No, it doesn't. And so these are your technology outcomes as part of this. And you can see it melting their brains a little bit when they think through of what I'm putting, I guess, technical capabilities and technical features into a business. Yeah, you are, because this is not just a product or a business led outcome. your technology partnership with those organizations requires you to be putting good technical standards into this. And if you can't, they're pushing you for it. Well, okay, well then what are you going to give up? Because these are our standards. And it's a hard balance, but that's where I typically see it break down. I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's complicated, right? Like, and this is one of those things where you can't, it's kind of back to some of the other conversations we have. If this is the first hard conversation you're having with your business partners about reality, when you get into a debate around, should you put in, should you do this refactor, or should you, go and fix these vulnerabilities, or should you migrate to cloud or migrate away from cloud, or whatever the thing is that's technically, coming from the technical side of the house as opposed to as an explicit business ask. I mean, the first thing is you have to set the right dynamics from the beginning, right? And obviously from the beginning it's hard, but like you have to argue for the right things, right? Because ultimately you also have to tie what you're asking to do to the outcome that matters, right? If you're doing a refactor because you read clean code over the weekend and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this better, this is cool, like that doesn't work, right? So, but if you're saying, hey, we've got a bunch of log4j in our system and there was a massive, 0 day that popped and we need to go clean it up, like that's it, and if we don't, there's all these exploits that are possible, like, that's a business outcome, right? Like that's something you're talking about there. So I think fundamentally everything's a negotiation. Everything in life is a negotiation. Make sure you're having the right conversation, right? Too often engineers aren't oriented to thinking about like, why does this matter? Like and honestly, there's usually a lot of really good reasons that they just don't articulate. Right. And it's like, and so it just sounds like, hey, you found a shiny thing you want to go do. Right. And that happens too. I mean, we all do it. We were just before this, we were talking about a refactor that I kind of wanted to do. And, you got to, reach through the screen and slap me in the face. So like we all do it. But I think if you can't justify it to your business partners, one of two things is true. It's not justifiable, or you're a bad communicator. I mean, it's possible that the business partners are completely unreasonable, but it's not usually because if they just say, hey, I don't care that this creates this creates a critical exploit where people can hack in and get other people's bank account numbers or something like that. If they literally say that, then they're probably not going to be in that job very long. And so you have to make the right case, and you also have to do it with some, reasonableness, right? You can't just be like, this is a security issue, so we have to do it. It's like understand the gradient of priority and understand the gradient of urgency. And you have to negotiate. You have to talk to your business partners. You have to care about what they care about. Because remember, they've got to turn around, whether you're talking to somebody in product or the business or whatever the organizational structure is, the way that they see the world, and it's back to the conversation we were having the other day around like writing a check for your work you do in a sprint, right? Like the way they see the world is they are paying X number of dollars per sprint or per time period, whatever. Maybe you're doing waterfall, so it's quarters or years or whatever. But whatever, they're writing a check for a program or a project or a thing, and they're expecting to get value back. And generally speaking, they're expected to grow revenue as a result of that value, right? Like you have to understand that and then give them the ammunition to defend the work you want to do, not just convince them, but also make it easier for them to convince their bosses and their stakeholders.
Well, you said something I want to come back to for a second, though. You mentioned everything's a negotiation. Mm-hmm. And I kind of agree, kind of don't agree with that. And there's certain cases where I don't think that there's negotiation to be had about an implementation plan. I remember a case where one of my teams was asked to build a feature, to build a new API. And here are the performance requirements that we're being asked to commit to. And so the product owner caught wind of what we're looking to put in, and it's going to take some extra work to put in the additional caching layer as a Dynamo database to cache it. And the product owner put it all into a deck and said, okay, well, here's the tech team's implementation plan. If you do it this way, you do it that way. And so, my manager at the time kind of said, halt, stop. This is not a negotiation. If you want this feature, this is this technology standards to implement that feature with these performance standards.
She's great, isn't she?
Leave it, but these are the standards. So, and I think that's
I can totally see her doing that. I think I know who you're talking about. That's great.
You don't know exactly who that is, but
yeah,
it's nuanced, but holding the line to say these are the technology best practices. Here's why we do this. It is not just for, we're not just writing code just to write code because we enjoy writing code that much. Nobody's really doing that. Maybe some that do, but really we have these performance measurements for specific reasons to make sure it's a good customer experience. We've all agreed on that. So, we're not going to nitpick how we're doing that because we've agreed the standards that need to be there for our customers. So we're not going to nitpick and, split hairs on, well, in this case, we're not going to do that. No, these are the standards. This is the best way to do it. So we're going to keep going.
So my response to that is that's the negotiation still. Like even saying we're not negotiating on this is, if you look at it in the longer, like in that moment, she may have been putting her foot down and being like, no, shut up. We're not even entertaining this conversation. But really in the spectrum of that relationship, that it's all a negotiation point.
Yeah, you're zooming out a couple levels to say, and sure, it is because you negotiated
we negotiated the terms of how of what needs to happen. And so as long as those aren't changing, this isn't changing. Right. And so that's what
you have to go to. I think that's the important part, is to negotiate on the outcomes that you're expecting so that you don't have to get into the technical details and say, you're going to trim this off for, I don't want to, I don't like the timeline. So we're going to ignore that.
No, you can't. You can't let people. Yeah, you can't let people do that. You can't let people do that. Well, I mean, there's one thing I really like. There's this Ray Dalio, who's gotten kind of famous because of his principles books and all that type of stuff. His company, Bridgewater Capital, has some pretty interesting ways that they do business and the way that they interact internally. And they built like a bunch of apps around like giving people real-time feedback in meetings. They record everything and people can come back in and score your performance at a meeting and all. It's wild stuff. But one thing that they do that I think, and again, I only know this from like books and articles and stuff like that, so I don't know exactly how it works in real life, but as a concept is super cool, which I think, and they do it formally, which I think a lot of people do it, a lot of organizations do it informally, which is your believability score, right? And so, and the way I remember them talking about it is like, okay, hey, the chief economist at Bridgewater, or the chief investment officer at Bridgewater on this topic, whatever it was, like macro monetary theory or whatever it was, like they have the top score for believability. Intern, bottom score. You both have the right to speak. You both have the right to be heard, but we're going to weight that person's opinion with like 10 or 100x the value of your opinion. Right. And so, and there they just formalize it and they just say, okay, hey, on this topic, this is sort of the stack rank of opinions, or and again, I don't know exactly the mechanism, but and so the reason I bring that up is when you think about when you're dealing with your business partners and you're dealing with people outside of your subject matter area, right? Like you have to your point, like, hey, we're not going to entertain this. Like if someone doesn't have the knowledge and the ability to actually speak into something like an architecture of like a caching layer or something like that, like, and they're a purely like a marketing product person or something like that, and they start having those opinions because, to your point, there's a timeline issue. You don't have to be necessarily like super intense to be like, I'm sorry, we're not going to have this. Like, you're just not qualified for this conversation, so we're just going to ignore you. Like, you don't have to say it like that, but you don't. I mean, sometimes you can. Like, I've certainly said things like that or worse, but I wouldn't recommend it generally. I think but the point is understand like where it's coming from and understand like they don't actually care about the caching layer. They don't actually care about the technical architecture. They care about the date, right? And so you have the right conversation. Right? Like don't argue whether or not you should do this technical implementation, because that's stupid, because that's irrelevant. Like the real conversation is like, okay, what do you actually care about here? You care about the fact that you want this on June 1st instead of July 1st. Okay, cool. Well, this is the only way we know to do it to meet your requirements. Do you want to change the requirements to do June 1st? Because we can't it's like you can only move the lever in one direction, right? You can either have a fixed date or you can have fixed requirements. You can't have both, right? So if you want to fix the date at an earlier time, okay, what requirements can we cut away to maybe hit that date? That's a much more useful conversation than, letting someone who's a marketing specialist have an opinion about a technical architecture. That, and again, anybody's entitled to an opinion, but
those conversations need to happen more often. And far too often I see app managers or a technical lead just say, okay. And then they're going to, I'll figure out how to meet the date. Well, that's the wrong thing. Back to your statement, everything's negotiation. It goes both ways. And it's what are you giving up? Are you giving up scope or are you going to give up date? Pick one, because these are the bare minimums we have to have. There are certain levers that you can pull in a technical implementation to put some things later.
So you and I are very different on this spectrum. So this is actually funny. This is a good topic, and I'll make this. I'll psychoanalyze us, and you can tell people how wrong I get it or how right I get it. So like I have a tendency to be someone who I would much rather push really hard and be super aggressive, and kind of. You're going to hit the target that you set, somewhere between 50 and 60% of the time, but you're going to be pretty, that momentum and that intent is going to be really productive. Whereas you're someone that wants to make sure you hit the target, right? Like, and so we have a very different modus operandi in terms of you are going to be extremely deliberate and calculated and insistent that the plan is reasonable and that has a high likelihood of success. And I mean, there are different schools of thought. And I don't know, is that a fair statement?
The story on that is that I did a deck one time or a presentation, and I was given 10 minutes to do the presentation. And sure enough, I hit spot on 10 minutes, and people were laughing about how, Jason's always on time, always delivers on time, even when it comes to delivering a presentation, spot on to the second 10 minutes. And that wasn't intentional. It's just my
it's how you operate. And as I've said to you in private many times, and I'll say it here because I'm a jerk, but like if you're always on time, you're not trying hard enough, right? Like you're not pushing enough, right? So
a lot. I've actually been pretty public with that. And when I say that to my teams, again, it starts to melt their brain. If you're on time all the time, you're not doing enough. Yeah. And so they think, well, something bad's going to happen. And I even brought this up to a leadership coach, and she helped me think through that. And, she was asking, well, what happens if you're not? What happens if you're not? And so that's the thing to start questioning yourself on is what happens if I'm not on time all the time? Now, I think the 50 to 60% on time ratio, it might be a little bit low, but maybe we'll squeak it up to an 80%.
I think if you're above 80, you're doing fine, right? Like that's where,
what happens? I think that's the question. Like what happens if you are a little bit late? And
it depends too, right? Like,
yeah,
like there's some things you can be late on and some things you can't, right? And it's like, whether you're in a big company or small or a startup, right? Like, hey, we've got to do this demo, at this trade show in a few weeks or whatever, right? Like, hey, we've got to have it ready for that. We've got to have something versus, oh yeah, the project, instead of releasing on April 1st, we release on April 17th. Like, okay, nobody really cares, right? Like, and so there's different, it matters. The situationally relevant, right? Like you have to kind of understand those things. I think it's also instructive, like, again, pulling this from other parts of business. I remember someone talking about this in terms of credit risk and like loss, right? And when they were writing loans, somebody told this story. I think it was at Bank of America. I don't know, whatever. Some point in my history, I was listening to somebody talk about credit risk rates. And they were saying, hey, like we actually got way too low on our losses. I was like, what do you mean? And I was like, that was such a confusing concept for me at the time. It was like, wait a minute, you're upset that you didn't lose, like you didn't have more loans like foreclose or loans like default. And what they were saying was there's a sweet spot where if you're like, say, only at 1% loss, then you're not writing enough loans, right? That means you're like leaving way too much business on the table where you could be right if you're being too conservative. So there's 3 or 4 or 5%, whatever the number is, I'm sure it changes based on macro environments, but there's a sweet spot where they're like, okay, we're going to maximize the profitability of our loan business, whatever it is, credit cards, mortgage, whatever, because we're going to get more volume by being a little bit less conservative, and the larger amount of volume will offset the additional losses that we take, right? And so like that's a whole thing for the credit business, loaning business, underwriting, all those different things. It's, and this is why, I mean, it's such a complicated environment. Like the loan, one person, like if you have the exact same credit profile, the exact same, everything's identical, and you go to a company one day versus a month from that day, you might get a different result in your underwriting because they have to balance it against their whole book, right? And so the point of that being, it's illustrative to the same thing. Like if you're always on time, you're being too conservative, and you're padding, right? Because you should be, if you're being aggressive, there's things that are going to pop up that are out of your control. Like you just know that it always happens, right? There's something, you're going to hit a snag, somebody's going to get sick or go on vacation in a way that you didn't account for, or whatever it is. And so you can't plan perfectly. And so generally you put in some padding, right? Like the rule of thumb often is take how long you think something will take and then double it. And then that's usually pretty good, right? Like for an individual thing. For a team, that you can do more sophisticated, calculations. But I think, balancing those things and understanding, again, in an enterprise, to your point, figuring out what's the outcome. If we miss this date, does that matter? Or is it just, as long as we hit that quarter, or like what is the tolerance there? And then obviously, how do you keep your foot on the gas so that, you don't expand to meet the time allotted?
What it comes down to, I've seen, is that people are very worried about their end of the year evaluation of if they miss these dates. I said, well, what's going to happen? And they have a hard time answering that. And, these are the people who are reporting to me like, okay, well, let's workshop that for a second. What's going to happen? If you miss all these dates, what's going to happen? And talk about how they could have a lower performance rating, which is going to affect their raises or their bonuses. And I said, okay, well, let's consider that for a second. Do you have a good reason for these things being late? Well, yeah, we were just workshopping it and things like that. And okay, well, you put yourself into my shoes for a second. Is that reasonable? Should you have been able to predict this? And we got to the point where if you're having a trend of having these things just come up and you're missing dates all the time, well, that's a bigger problem than just missing a couple dates. And we started to get through, well, you should be documenting these things. You should be working through what are these things that quote unquote just come up that are always pushing your dates out. And so now it's helping these app managers to, I don't want to say see around the corners, that's a stupid term, but be better at predicting the uncertainty that typically happens, and say, okay, well, if you're missing a couple things, do you think I have a checkbox that says you've missed XYZ dates? No. Okay. You're delivering on time to what we're expecting you to. So that's what you need to target for. And if things are a couple days late, it's fine, unless your late is now stopping his whole launch from going. Those we're going to remember. But the little blips here and there.
No, 100%. That's good. No, it's good. I mean, people, it's funny. It's funny in an enterprise environment. It's totally different than startups. Predictability is often more valuable than velocity, right? Which I have always been sort of allergic to, personally. I kind of, not that I would compare myself to Elon or anything like that, but like I'm much more aligned to his sort of like, I'm going to throw out a goal, we'll try to get to it. Like it's probably not realistic, but it's directional, right? And so like, and of course he's someone that famously you can't trust any of the timelines he sets, which I'm not saying that that's entirely true of me. But I think that's more, I philosophically, I'm more aligned to that approach, is like, let's just scramble as hard as we can to get as fast as we can to where we go, because we'll get there better than, okay, I'm going to be predictable and I'm going to hit that. Again, at the enterprise, when you're managing hundreds of developers and all these different interconnected, interdependent systems. Like I understand it, and I've operated in that environment where you have to do things that way, but I've always thought it was kind of stupid, and always thought it was like I remember the first like real agilist that I was talking to, and it was a guy, a portfolio guy at Bank of America, and he had done a ton of work to be like he and his boss, or my boss at the time, had really pioneered agile in B of A in like kind of like 2013, 2014 timeframe, and they'd really taken the slings and arrows on it, and maybe even later than that. And so he was quite the evangelist, and I remember him literally saying to me, I said, here's the deal. Would you rather I get 100 points done in a quarter, but would you rather I target to get 150 points done but get 100 done, or would you rather I target to get 80 and get 80 done? And he's like, I'd rather you target to get 80 and get 80 done. And that always blew my mind, because I just didn't get it. Like, and I mean, I get it now in terms of, like I said, the predictability of coordination and gaining credibility with your business partners, right? And like telling them what you're going to do and then doing it. Like there's really a lot of value in it there. But like when you think about our world, like in the startup world, like predictability is not really that important, right? It's velocity. Like how do we get the next iteration out so we can learn more and, figure out, get more feedback from our customers. So it's just being situationally aware is critical, basically.
Yeah. And it's defining, what does predictability mean? It's just like you mentioned, the 150 to 100, that's defining the goals. You're defining predictability. You're defining what is the success criteria of the team. There are certain teams and organizations that this team is late, even by a week, you're going to have a cascading effect of an entire initiative going out by, 2 months at that point, because it just takes a little bit longer, takes a little bit longer, takes a little bit longer. So it's typically going to be the early dominoes that delay that can take long tail an entire initiative off course. So it's tough, and it's also part of the culture too. I remember there was a team that would always remind everyone, well, if this team is late, we're going to be late too. And it kind of became a game to us, and started laughing about it. But it can really taint a whole culture by constantly throwing stones at another team, like, well, they're late, and so now you're beating over the head of, okay, well, I have learned through this is that do not be late, and pad the dates so that it's predictable. For this team, predictability needs to be as close to 100% as you can, because if not, you're going to build a reputation for being late all the time. So I'm not going to do that. So you do less work. So my point being is that, what does the culture say as well? Is the culture say, okay, well, I can absorb this weak move? Yeah. Does this culture say, okay, if they're a little bit, that's fine, we'll pivot, do something else? So zooming out to that a little bit it goes to your organization planning, your initiative planning of not going to waterfall in your approach and splitting it up so you can parallel as much work as possible.
I mean, architecture matters too, right? Like that's why, those big interconnected releases are a nightmare, right? And so, and that's the challenge. That's why big organizations struggle. That's why big organizations have massive teams, right? It seems crazy to think that, a place like Bank of America probably has 10 times the software engineers that a place like Google does, right? Like, it's just wild. Like, what? But they've got a lot of tech, and there's this, you get diminishing returns the more people, and the more people you have and the more applications you have, the harder it is to do anything, because you have to interact. Your touch points grow and grow and grow and grow. It's actually one of the powers of the AI stuff as we get into that. Like, can teams stay smaller? Can you do more? Do you not need 100 people? Can you do it with 20 people? And then do you get the benefit of the leanness and the communication and the smoothness of 20 people versus 100? Those are very different organizations, right? Like, in terms of the coordination required. There's a bunch of laws that people have kind of come up with around, like, the square root of blah, blah, blah. The more people, basically proves the more people you have involved in something, the complexity and difficulty of doing it goes up exponentially, right? And yeah, so
That's the thing, is keep it as small as possible to get the work done.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Actually, speaking of AI, what do we think about OpenAI buying Windsurf? Do we have an opinion about this?
Kind of early to tell. I've heard some good things about Windsurf. We'll see. It seems like they're trying to come up with a strong cursor competitor. I guess too early to tell, but I don't know. There's a lot of competition in that space now with just the AI and models.
What do you think about $6 billion for it? Like an 18-month-old company that was a fork of VS Code. It's kind of wild, huh?
It's wild. That valuation is crazy. These AI valuations are kind of nuts at this point, but that's a whole other conversation.
All right. Well, I think it's to me, it's always interesting. And I did a little write up on LinkedIn about this too, right? Like, I think that to me, OpenAI is in a weird place because although they have a big first mover advantage and they have a ton of installs and DAUs with, consumers is not where the money's going to be for AI, right? The money's going to be in enterprises, and I don't think they have any kind of a moat in the enterprise, right? Like they did initially. Their deal with Microsoft was genius. I mean, we saw it inside of other organizations, like getting Microsoft to indemnify them and indemnify the customers and validate that the data is not going back to OpenAI, and it was staying inside your tenant of Azure was a huge advantage to OpenAI. But I mean, that didn't last very long, maybe 12 months, right? And then Bedrock came out, and then Google had all their AI stuff, and essentially all the models are available on all these cloud providers. I mean, you still can't run. I don't think you can get OpenAI through Bedrock, but they're starting to the difference between the models is shrinking. Gemini and Grok are better in some cases than OpenAI stuff. Obviously, they leapfrog each other all the time, but then you got all the open source models too. So my impression is that what OpenAI is trying to do is get in front of a very important constituent within the enterprise, which is the engineer, right? And right now, the coding tools, as we know, right, are some of the best uses of AI, because it's just phenomenal at it. And so, and it's also one of the safer ways to get into big enterprises because it already has all these controls around it, and so everybody's used to protecting. Everybody's already treating code like it's dangerous. Like there's all these different workflows and processes and stuff that are sort of innate to it. So that's sort of my impression. I see it as I bet you they see it strategically as a beachhead into the enterprise, because from my perspective, and you and I have talked about this, like Cursor's awesome. It's amazing. We like Devin. It's cool. It's a little hard to actually use in real life, but
I wasn't as big of a fan of Devin after a while. It just took too much sitting. You send it off on a task, and maybe it's right, maybe it's not, but it's good. It's good for really small tasks, but
it did a couple of things early that was really cool, but we ended up not using it as much, I think, right? Like that was sort of our outcome. But I think what's going to happen is, what's going to be interesting to me is can GitHub catch Cursor, right? Because they've got so much. They've got the distribution already, right? Like they've got your apps, they've got your pipelines and your repos and all those different things, and they've got the contracts already, like things like that. And it's not terrible; it's just not as good, right?
Well,
like
I think
Cursor's 2-3x better.
Interface of Cursor is better, 100%, but they don't have any of their models. They have, so I think, some internal models, but I don't think very many people use the Cursor own models. But so I think that's where they're going to struggle. Is, well, Microsoft has better access to models, to the tools. And so now what they have to do is they have to catch up to the interface, because the interface of Cursor agent mode is rock solid. I mean, it's worlds better than VS Code in the agent mode. So if VS Code and Microsoft can catch up to that, that's, I think, where they'll come up ahead quite a bit.
And I mean, their preview, like the stuff that we can't even, like we're a technology partner of GitHub. Like we have a free enterprise account, and so we get access to a lot of new stuff. We don't even access to some of it that they've done videos of. Like, we talked about Devin. They've got a feature where they basically treat Copilot like Devin, where you can write up your issue, have your discussion, and then just tag Copilot to do the work. Like that's super cool. Like that was actually one of the things I always found. I know Devin just rolled out their linear integration, which kind of does the same thing. Or Cognition, I guess would be the company that rolled that out. But like some of that type of stuff, like the way it's deeply integrated, to your point, is really interesting and powerful. And like you said, they're all using the same models under the covers, right? Like it's not that different. And then it's just about the wrapper. It's like, well, VS Code, I mean, Microsoft built VS Code, so they can add some of these things on top of that and make it better. And it's not like they can't just copy whatever Cursor does. So I imagine Cursor will keep a lead for a while. The question is how much does GitHub close the gap? And then as they close the gap, how much, is it worth that extra 20% or do you just use GitHub because it's easy and you just press a button and you have it, right? And then you get all the other stuff too. It's good. It's not bad. Like I was, if you remember our life cycle, like I was really into the Copilot stuff. Like, this is awesome. This is so good. And then you got Cursor and you're just like, no, this is terrible. You have to use this. And it took me like a week or two. And then I think you showed me something like an agent mode and I was like, oh my God, okay, let me try it.
Select your model. And yeah, I mean, you can focus on a couple things. And Microsoft, if they could, like I said, if they could match or exceed the interface with Cursor, they're going to win. But if the Cursor team can just keep focusing on those features, they've got a new 0.5 version coming out soon that is going to, help with, adding more context and adding more tokens to your request. And it's supposed to be better, but also the pricing is going to change. So we'll see how that comes up. But I think if they can continue to work through that quick iteration, keep the models pinpointed to where you're trying to work. There's a couple models that are, you ask for one thing and then, you walk away for a second and now it's edited 50 files. That's a problem. But,
Gemini.
Sonnet. There's a few of them that stand like that, but,
Well, it's wild. It's so cool. It's so much fun. It's coding so much fun. Like, talk about refactor and stuff. Like, we refactored some of our integration stuff into Glue, and into using AWS Glue. And I was super not into it. You were having to twist my arm so much. And I was just like, oh, I don't want to learn Python. I hate Python. I hate indentation. This is stupid. And honestly, because of Cursor, it was no big deal, right? Like,
that's a good segue because that was something that, you and I had a pretty deep conversation on the...
I threw a hissy fit, I think is the correct way to describe that.
You pushed back quite a bit, whatever, you can call it any number of things, but, you push back on it hard because thinking it's going to take longer versus just writing what we're used to, a TypeScript Lambda to process these integrations. And so, I know we had to get through a few of those sessions to help understand it, but really what it came down to is knowing your audience and finding out that what is your goal here? Because sure, we could just go with a vanilla node Lambda to process this data, but then what's next? And how does this scale? And asking the right questions of what do we really care about? Yes, it's moving fast, but it's not just moving fast right now. Balancing the future thought of processing large data sets without having to completely redo an entire application for a new integration. Well, now we got a lot of this stuff in Glue that's already ready for us. Now it's using tools that are better suited for the job. Yeah, you got to bump your head against some new tools along the way to get there. And yeah, maybe the first one is slower, but the next one's going to be even better and better and better. Whereas with the standard way of writing that node Lambda, each one is going to take a predictable amount of time each time. Yeah. Whereas with Glue, it's going to get shorter, and we're going to be paying off much quicker with the speed, the reliability, and using the right tool for the job, which is I think anybody's target, but understanding why. What is this bringing to the table? Why is this a right now thing versus, well, can't we just do it later? Well, technically, yes, but if we do this now, this is what we're getting. Is this the right tool for this thing? It's complex. Yes, that's why we're using it, because it is complex, because it's designed for massive data sets.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think like we definitely agreed that Lambda wasn't the right thing to do anymore, right? Because of the scale and the memory and all this, and we had some longer running tasks potentially. So we were, really for us, I think it sort of moving forward, it was a decision between, do we use batch and just run it as part of our process, or do we push it into glue? And yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where everything's a negotiation, right? Like you don't, I would say, ultimately we all have our roles, and it was your call, and you disagree and commit and stuff, and there's pros and cons. Like it's not like anything's right or wrong on these things. There's trade-offs, and I mean, definitely there are a lot of pros to using the glue stuff, and if without Cursor, I don't think it would have been workable. I think the cost of switching was way higher without it, but but yeah, to your point, I think hopefully the second one's pretty fast compared to the first, but
probably won't be running it, but
no, it's fine. But yeah, no, I mean, it's good. It's those are sort of the journeys that we go on, and you kind of, you're never really sure if you're right or wrong. You won't really know for a while. And also there maybe isn't a right or wrong. So like, don't dig your heels in, just get it done. Right. I think is sometimes the approach, but cool. All right. Wartime, peacetime. What else? Anything else we should hit on that?
That was a good one. I can't think of anything else. We beat that one pretty hard.
Yeah. Well, I do. Something just popped in my head. So let me ask this. Like, you're an app manager. Let's say there's some app manager at some big company, and there's just been a layoff. Maybe the team is down from 25 people to 20, right? And like you're that guy, that guy or gal is looking for some advice on what do I do for my team? What do I do for myself, both to improve our position to make sure we're not next on the list, but also to how do I orient them in the most productive way possible? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, I think a lot of these app managers, they don't do themselves and their teams justice. And you see certain teams that they talk about, well, hey, I just did this one little thing, and they scream it from the rooftop of they did this little thing, and everybody's looking around them and saying, well, what is that? That's nothing. But then you've got other teams who are this little island of technical excellence who don't say a single thing. And it's, what are you doing to expand your team's visibility within an organization? Because you could be amazing at your job, but if nobody knows it, it's the same analogy I was using before. If you've got a Ferrari in your garage and you never drive it, what's the point of having it? And that's the way that these teams can be looked at. If nobody knows how good they are, if nobody knows what they're delivering, if nobody knows that they are the foundation, they built some of these patterns, you might as well have not done it, because you don't get, I don't want to say credit because that's not the right term for it, but you need a little bit of that visibility to show that you are providing a lot of value. That's just kind of hidden behind the scenes.
So let me jump in on that, right? So let me give you the very engineer response to that. It's like, I'm an engineer. I'm not a marketer. It's not my job to go and tell everybody how cool what we're doing is. Like, they should just know that. Like, what's your response to that?
But then, if you're not talking about what you're doing, are you really as good as you think you are? Because part of that job, part of your role as it evolves, is to teach and be a mentor to others. Part of mentoring is talking to people. Part of, teaching is to talk to other people and show the patterns that you're building, show how it was impactful. And so we've talked about this a lot of times, the interpersonal skills, the people skills, as things are evolving, as the coding has become easier and easier, the personal skills are becoming that much more important to talk to others, to collaborate with others, to make sure that the good patterns that you have designed, the ones that you've built, start to get adopted elsewhere, because it's kind of going to make your job a little bit easier in the long run, because that noisy neighbor problem is going to be gone, but also it helps the organization. In zooming out to, my job is less about writing code, my job is about helping the organization. What's going to help the organization the best? Is it just going to be me to stick my head under in my laptop screen and just write code, or is the most effective thing for my role to be helping those around me get better, which is going to better equip the organization for the long haul. And as we evolve, as we get more AI tools that are going to make the coding much easier, your job is going to be less coding, more building patterns and sharing those patterns across the organizations.
Okay, cool. So your advice is, if I can repackage it back, is something like, go ahead, or, market what you're doing. Make sure everyone understands the value of you and your team. And not in a super, like, obviously you can't overdo that or else it is counterproductive. But in these times, in a time when you're in a tight spot where the company's in financial trouble or whatever, you want to make sure you're putting your foot forward in terms of what's important and valuable. So you can't just assume that everyone knows you're the best, and you have to make sure to kind of continue to
not many people really know that you're the best. If you just think that, not many people will actually know. They might think that you're there, but they're not going to think much of you at all. You just do things.
Cool. All right. I like that. I agree with that. I mean, I think that's a big thing. Like, understand who is, like, what's important, and make sure you're doing what's important, and make sure people know you're doing what's important. It's critical, right? And again, it's in a smaller organization, you can just trust that people know that you're doing the right stuff. In a bigger organization, requires a little bit of promotion, unfortunately. Just is what it is. And it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. And so you can be someone that's upset about that. Like I kind of did the mocking on the engineer, that the whiny engineer that says, I'm an engineer, I shouldn't have to do those things. It's like, it's fine. I should be able to eat 1,000 cookies a day and not get fat, but that's not how it works, right? It just is what it is. And so, there are laws of physics, there's laws of culture and laws of human behavior, and you can fight them if you want. You're just not going to usually be very successful. You're better off just understanding that is what it is, and do that in the most functional way possible. And, you'll be happier and you'll be more successful, because that people will think better of you, and then more positive things will come from that. All right. Thanks for the time. Thanks for everybody else that stuck with us for this one. Another episode of Tech Council. Take care.
See ya.
That's a wrap for this episode of Tech Council, brought to you by DevGrid. Thanks for joining us as we dive into building smarter solutions for the enterprise. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, leave us a rating, and share your thoughts on X, at DevGrid Inc., or at devgrid.io. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll explore more ways to thrive in the enterprise. Until then, keep building.